Today's show is sponsored by Studio 3T. We all know MongoDB is easy. Now make it powerful. Studio 3T is the best IDE on the market to manage your MongoDB databases securely. They take customer feedback seriously, and their users have helped them build features like the nifty import-export wizard, which lets you run, automate, and schedule your import-export tasks easily. SQL, JSON, CVS, and Mongo dump formats are supported, and you can export entire collections or views, current queries, current query results, and specific documents too. Studio 3T's SQL query feature is another great way to save time. Write SQL expressions and joins to query MongoDB and view your SQL queries' equivalent code in multiple languages. If you're unfamiliar with MongoDB language, Studio 3T's Visual Query Builder offers a simple yet powerful drag-and-drop method to find what you need, fast. Get a free 30-day trial, no credit card needed, at studio3t.com/cloudcast.
Cloudcast Media presents from the massive studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. This is the Cloudcast with Aaron Delp and Brian Gracely, bringing you the best of cloud computing from around the world.
Good morning, good evening, wherever you are. Welcome back to the Cloudcast. We are coming to you live from the massive Cloudcast studio here in Raleigh, North Carolina. Hope everybody is doing well. Hope everybody is safe as we move further into June. And as most people know, the news these days is a little tough. And with that, we're going to skip Cloud News of the Week as we normally would do at the top of the show. You know, everybody's kind of processing what's going on in the world differently. Everybody's got trying to kind of understand what's going on. Some people are angry. Some people are trying to understand things. Some people are trying to make contributions and help out. And we think all of those are great, and we want to be respectful of those. I think the only guidance that we have this week, and again, we're probably not in the best position to kind of give anybody any guidance on some of the tragedies that are going on, some of the inhumanities, and some of the difficulties that are out there. I guess what we would say, and Aaron and I have talked about this a lot, if you're able to help out in any way, shape, or form, whether that is being actively involved or helping out in some sort of activity, cleanups, or other types of things, please feel free to do that. You should be encouraged to do that. We support that. If you feel like that's not the right thing for you, or if it's being out amongst large crowds of people is not the right thing for you to be doing, but you can make a donation somehow, whether that's to one of the groups that's helping out in one way, shape, or form, whether those are legal helping or food or any other way, make a donation. It makes a difference. If you can help in that way, that's great. And if not, if you're not really sure what to do, if you're kind of looking at everything going on, you're confused, you're not exactly sure how it impacts you, how it affects you, or even just how to process it, I think the best guidance I can give is to kind of listen. Go look for something to read, try and educate yourself. We'll put some things in the show notes this week as opposed to our normal Cloud News of the Week show notes types of things that we think we found useful. They're good for having conversations and they're good for listening. So with that, we're going to wrap up this top of the hour. Again, the news of the week is difficult right now, but we are excited about our interview this week. We have a great interview this week. It shouldn't overlook the news that's going on. Obviously, that takes precedence for a lot of people. We do have a great guest. We're going to dive into some topics around sort of culture of how do we be better at involving security and security from involving it in the culture of us building applications. And we'll have that right after the break. Today's show is brought to you by Taos. Trustfall, Taos has caught brands such as Sephora, Netflix, Target, Dell, and NerdWallet. In a recent customer feedback survey, 98% are satisfied with Taos' performance. If you're ready to hack your culture and accelerate the value of the cloud, talk to the experts at Taos. Find out more at taos.com. That's TAOS.com. Taos.com. Today's Cloudcast is brought to you by Datadog, a full-stack monitoring platform that integrates with over 400 technologies like Gremlin, PagerDuty, AWS Lambda, Spinnaker, and many more. With rich visualizations and algorithmic alerts, Datadog can help you monitor the effects of chaos experiments, identify weaknesses, and improve the reliability of your systems. Visit datadog.com/cloudcast to start a free 14-day trial and receive one of Datadog's famously cozy t-shirts. That's datadog.com/cloudcast. And we're back. And folks, as you know, we've talked a lot on this show over the years and over with various topics and various guests about a lot of things that have to do with how we operate our environments and how operating the environments is sometimes becoming more difficult. We have distributed applications. We have now blended teams, SRE teams and DevOps teams. And, oftentimes we see companies making investments in advanced types of monitoring in terms of observability. And sometimes security isn't always part of that conversation, or we're not always exactly sure how to make security part of this conversation, how to do it effectively, especially since we're making investments around, whether it's observability, monitoring tools to help us know what's going on in our systems. And so today we thought it'd be really interesting to kind of dive into how do we better integrate security into our monitoring and the visibility of what's going on. So excited to have Marc Tremsal, who is Director of Product Management at Datadog, to join us. Marc, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Brian. Pleasure being here.
Yeah. So you're over in Paris. How are things over there these days?
Well, things are slowly reopening. And the weather's nice. Things are pretty good. Slowly going back to normal, I suppose.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. You've played a role. You've had quite an interesting background, even prior to Datadog, sort of in designing secure systems and some of the most critical environments in the world, some of the most kind of important industries. Can you give us a little bit of your background, help people understand a little bit of your background, prior to coming to Datadog, and then what your focus is there these days?
Yeah, absolutely. So, as you mentioned, right now, I'm part of the product team here at Datadog. I've been here for nearly 3 years now. And so, for people who don't know, so we build a SaaS monitoring and analytics product, right? And right now, my focus is on our security monitoring product, which, is the set of security use cases within that larger platform. Before that, I was working on the security of the product itself. Even before that, I was a consultant for several years in France and the US. So, a bit of a long story leading me to product and security use cases within the larger DevOps ecosystem.
Excellent. It's like, as I mentioned in kind of the introduction, obviously we've talked to Datadog before. We've had the chance to talk to the team. We've talked to a lot of folks around some of the monitoring and observability. Sometimes I feel like those get a lot of attention, and maybe security doesn't get as much attention. Can you kind of, give us a sense of, from your perspective, how you're starting to see whether it's capabilities coming into some of those types of tools, or just a mindset that security has to be part of kind of your day-to-day operation. It's not kind of its own separate thing. How are you seeing those environments kind of blend together, either in good ways or mistakes that people are making?
I think that's a great question. I think there are two main ways in which we see observability and security very much colliding or even merging. So, when you think about it, observability, we're really just talking about the ability to peek into a system and understand its internal state by looking at outputs, right? And well, to secure a system, you obviously need to understand its behavior, what's normal and what's not. So it was always a very natural combination, but it's become a lot more important recently. There are a couple main reasons. I would say the main one is just security teams looking at what developers and operations have access to and realizing the potential there. So in particular, if you go back a few years, security was always very much about looking at logs and events. And in the modern observability toolkit, you have a lot of other stuff, like distributed traces and time series. And yeah, security teams are realizing a lot of that could be very interesting as well for detecting threats, investigating potential incidents, and so on.
Yeah, absolutely. So, we get into more of these distributed types of systems. Obviously, people are trying to figure out what's the right blend of, I want to have systems that can be responsive, that can scale. So we're seeing more and more of that. And then, especially for security, we've got a lot of different tools that are out there or elements that help us. Like, how do you've, as you mentioned in the introduction, you've worked kind of on the security of platforms themselves, and now you're working on the products that live on top of that. How do you think about sort of a framework to say, how do we think about security and the visibility? Because you've got everything from proxies to authentication systems and key management, and if you sit down with people and they say, hey, look, we're going to start undertaking these newer ways of doing stuff. Like, what's a framework? What's kind of a way of thinking about, where security should fit? What's sort of the basics that they'd want to get in place up front that then other things can build upon.
Yeah, that's super interesting. So what happens is with this explosion in complexity, you have microservices, you have all of these very complex systems evolving very, very quickly. Oftentimes, security teams realize they maybe struggle a little bit to understand the full context, right? And that's what I meant when I say the toolkit that's available to you through observability. We think about, for example, distributed tracing, right? So you're going to have the ability in a single trace to see the full context for a transaction as it cuts across this distributed environment. Now, for security teams, this is super interesting because it means they understand dependencies. They can see if there was some kind of attack. They can see whether it landed or not, how each service reacted along the way. So that's definitely one aspect of it. And I would say the other aspect is security teams, they're really embracing an engineering mindset, right? To look at how they can secure the environment. So you go back in time and maybe they were more the guardians of the production environment, right? No, you cannot deploy this. We need to do a pen test. It's going to take a few weeks and so on. And very much like with what happened with the DevOps movement, you go back 10 years ago and you had sysadmins doing the same, right? If I'm going to have to run this, I need to test it. It's going to take a few weeks. And the DevOps movement kind of solved that. And I think we're seeing security teams going through the same journey right now. And developers as well. So developers picking up the pager, having more skin in the game when it comes to security. You build it, you run it, you secure it as well. And conversely, security teams asking, okay, the only way I'm going to be able to scale without, the team tripling in size is embracing this engineering mindset. I'm going to have to build distributed systems that provide guardrails for developers and operations to make sure they run their own services securely. Does that make sense? This kind of
it's interesting, and it gets me thinking. So when we tend to talk about like DevOps, as you mentioned, we've seen that movement grow. DevOps tended to be about how do we put kind of build systems such that we can do putting kind of using code and code repositories is the way that we track things. We've got deployment systems, kind of automated deployment systems. And then we hear people talk about sort of DevSecOps as, okay, don't forget about security in there. I almost feel like what you're talking about from an engineering perspective is more of like security in the way that we talk about SRE, where you're saying, hey, I've got to be actually engineering things that are going to help make the system better. Is there some nuance in between there? Is that a right way of thinking about this, that this needs to be sort of part of what people do in the SRE discipline? Or is it okay to just sort of go, hey, don't forget security, DevSecOps kind of thought process or what people are doing is okay?
100%. Looking at the whole DevOps movement here, I think is essential. A lot of what happens, so people say DevSecOps, and that means different things to different people. And oftentimes, I don't know if it helps clarify the actual practices that are behind that word. In particular, I think the conversation oftentimes devolved into, well, a lot of DevOps was about the CI/CD pipeline, and certainly we can bake a lot of security checks into the CI/CD pipeline as well. Therefore, DevSecOps. And I mean, the pipeline is a really important part of it, but SREs and the whole DevOps movement, there was a lot more to it than that, right? And by virtue of working on observability, we tend to, I guess we're in a position where we tend to see a lot more some of these other practices, right? So I don't know. Let me pick an example. So let's say you're a security team, and one of the challenges is, I think you mentioned key management earlier, right? Mm-hmm. So maybe you're deploying HashiCorp Vault, right? That's great, but now you're essentially running a pretty complex system, and you're going to need to make sure it stays up and running all the time. So as a security team, you're really a security engineering team, engineering first and with a security discipline. And so that's important. But the other thing is a lot of what SRE teams have been doing for the longest time, they are natural analogs in the security world. So think of things like game days and chaos engineering and whatnot. These also apply here. There are ways for security to use those techniques and methods.
It is interesting to sort of see sometimes the nuances of it, or if certain things continue forward. I'm curious. The other thing I'm kind of curious about. So, I mentioned some of the sort of security systems we have, right? Authentication systems or firewalls or other things. I feel like to a certain extent those are. This is going to come off as the wrong term, but sort of they're kind of point in time. They're there to prevent an incident from happening kind of as it happens. You either get in or you get out, or it authenticates you or it doesn't. The systems that Datadog provides and around observability tend to have more time to them. They tend to show trends. There's things that are going on. Does that help security be able to look at sort of trends over time? Are there things that we can pick up over time from security, or is it always just, when that attack or that vulnerability comes in, I have to deal with it? Is there some aspect of sort of short-term and long-term to security that some of the observability tools can help us with, or monitoring tools can help us with?
Yeah, I would say definitely. So what happens is, and you're right, teams, they start with real-time detection of threats and misconfigurations. What you can't detect, you can't act on. So that's nearly always the starting point. But then they realize they have access to all of this data that they didn't used to, and they start to get really creative, I would say. And that translates into things we can do for, like vulnerability management. I've heard use cases about using some of that data for threat modeling. I mentioned chaos engineering. I guess, that's also another part of it. Actually, I'm happy to talk about really any of those if you're interested.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to kind of just dive into maybe one example of how people are doing some of the threat modeling. I mean, I think that's always an interesting thing. Is you'll get management who just goes like, "Hey, am I going to be secure? Are we going to end up on the front page of the Financial Times or Wall Street Journal?" But like, give us some sense of kind of what you see in reality of what some of that threat modeling looks like, and maybe how some of the tools are helping to make that either easier or just better to visualize, maybe?
Yeah. So on threat modeling specifically, a recent example I'm thinking of is, so you go back in time, and a lot of those exercises, they were based on someone would pull up some architecture diagram from like 2 years ago, and it's more or less accurate, and you have a bunch of assumptions about the system that are going to be really important feeding into that threat modeling exercise. And the other day I had a customer take a look at, we have this thing, it's called the service map. It's really like an application layer view of services that actually talk to each other. So if you think about it, it's really an architecture diagram but it's accurate. It's it's actual traffic, actual data points being exchanged, and you can actually drill into what kind of data is being exchanged. And so one of their first comment was, "Oh, wait a minute, I can use that for threat modeling." And I think specifically they were talking about building attack trees. And the reason for that is you can see. Let's say you're looking for personal information, right? Let's say someone wanted to access personal information. So now you have, you can answer which systems have access to that, and how do they access it? How do they process it? Where does it go, right? And this is super useful for security. Actually, it's also very interesting for compliance. So in a lot of data protection regulations, like in the EU, you have the GDPR, obviously. And a data mapping exercise is actually one of the requirements. So you end up building this kind of maps of what data types, especially sensitive data, flows and where. So this kind of real-time, realistic view, not of how the system is supposed to behave, but how it actually behaves, that turns out to be very useful for security and compliance both.
Interesting. Any kind of, like, we always get requests from from the audience to say, hey, it's cool to talk to the people building these technologies, but like, can you give us some examples of other companies, quote unquote customers, if you will, that have some interesting examples of how they're using it? Do you have any? Obviously, you get a chance to talk to a lot of companies using the technology. Any kind of good stories that you can share about people that have been not just saying, hey, we implemented some technology, but really kind of going, here's how it impacted our business. Here's how it, either we have, like you said, a game day, or we have a new launch of a new product or whatever. Any stories you can tell or anecdotes you can kind of share?
I think so. So something I'm realizing, actually, that's not just a single customer, that comes up a lot. I think traditionally, a lot of the security approaches where we generate alerts, we have people look at them, and when we talk to security teams at cloud native companies, especially, and startups and so on, that's really not how they approach it. Something that comes up a lot is they're looking at these observability products as more of a pipeline for data, an ETL pipeline, and they don't really want people on the other side of things. They don't want to page if they can avoid it. They're really trying to automate as much of it as possible. And so, for example, they end up doing very interesting things like, how so many of the breaches you read about, they are really caused by a misconfiguration within the cloud environment, right? Like someone left an S3 bucket open, or a security group wide open to the internet. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So there's a ton of food guns in the cloud, and so you see those security teams. They're going to take the alerting pipeline, but what they do instead of paging people is they're going to forward those through like a queuing system like SNS or through webhooks. They're going to send that to a Lambda. The Lambda is going to check whether that specific resource is supposed to be open to the internet. Usually they check against some kind of whitelist that's in Git, in some kind of repository. That means versioned. There's a change management process for it, right? And if the resource is not meant to be open to the internet, possibly, then the Lambda is going to automatically remediate that. So now, instead of having to investigate and page people, by default, you enforce the safe configuration. You also notify the developer and say, hey, if you meant to do that, here is how you would get it approved ahead of time, and then you can try again. And I think that's super interesting because, again, you read the news, and every other breach is a backup on some S3 bucket that was exposed to the internet or other AWS accounts, right? So I find that fascinating, this very different mindset that cloud native security teams have when thinking about detection.
Yeah, and those are always... there's always a fine line between people kind of understanding the basics of those, and I think you did a good job of explaining, kind of, okay, here's the core thing we do. We happen to use some technology to fix it, and then sometimes enterprises tend to get wrapped up in this, kind of overthinking of going, well, we have 10 regulatory things we have to do, and we have these previous 11 steps, and sometimes you just have to go, yeah, it'd be nice if you had a system that said, hey, that bucket's not supposed to be open. Go check. Here's a mechanism that checks it, fixes it, and then alerts it to people if those are going on. So yeah, it is interesting to see that. Any kind of basic, kind of as new things have rolled out, obviously people are always trying to figure out like, okay, what are quote unquote best practices, but like any common tips that you've seen, especially, that you've learned from these cloud native companies that you feel like are applicable to a broad audience that you can kind of pass along, good, common sense type of security tips that you can pass along to them?
I think so. So a lot of customers, that come to us asking about security, they're actually on the SRE side or the developer side, and they are de facto responsible for the security of their services. And so they're more interested about understanding how to improve the detection and, avoid mistakes. And for that, there's really not a ton of shortcuts. We're going to provide some of that knowledge, some of that security knowledge. Where I think it's more interesting is security teams asking, hey, how can I work with my developers and operations? And the advice there is super simple. It's just go talk to them for once. And a a lot of those DevOps techniques and practices, they're going to translate to you very naturally. So not just the CI/CD pipeline, but how does your ops team do on call? Can security alerting become more of a decentralized responsibility? At the end of the day, they know their systems best. Can they become a part of that? Or take a look at how they monitor services in production. You're probably going to find out that there's a ton of telemetry that historically you haven't had access to, that's going to help you do a better job or do it faster. Or how do they run game days, right? A lot of security teams are not super familiar with game days, but that's very directly applicable to security as well. So think about it. You have engineers, and essentially they're just trying to build resilience into their systems. And resilience is actually a very important word on the security side. Outside detection, prevention, remediation, resilience is the other term that comes up a lot. And on the engineering side, the way we do that, we write down assumptions around how a system is supposed to react when specific failures happen. We give a heads up to people, and then we go try it out in production or maybe staging if it's a bit early and we're not so confident. Well, you can do that for security. You can say, the system should fail closed when I kill this instance, or when this upstream dependency, like the network fails. X, Y, and Z should happen that I believe to be safe. Well, go try it out. And if you've successfully tried it out in a realistic environment, maybe you can even automate that. And that's, people say chaos engineering or game days, but like they're really automating a lot of those checks in production. And that's really what resilience is about. So yeah, I think the main advice usually when they reach out to us is to talk about some of those DevOps practices and to encourage them to actually go talk to the SREs and developers within their organization.
Yeah. Yeah, no, and I think that the last point you made really is almost the most, well, I don't want to say the most important because security has a lot of aspects, but people sometimes forget that resiliency is almost the very first part of security. If your system's not up, you're not stealing anything at that point anymore. But focus on resilience is incredibly important. I want to ask you one last question before you go, and again, thank you so much for the time. You mentioned that earlier on with Datadog, you had been focused on kind of securing the underlying platform itself, the thing that other companies would consume. You're now on the product side. I'm curious, because we have a lot of people that listen to the show that I know, either go between different roles or are trying to understand, kind of how to adjust to things. How have you found it from you have one environment that and have to own and maintain to you're off asking the marketplace, well, what do you need? What do you want? And you get all these different kind of requests. Like, how have you adjusted from kind of platform engineering to sort of product management or platform management? How's your thought process changed?
Yeah, that's a good question. So specifically, I was working on the security of the product within the product organization. And what that means is already as a liaison with customers, what security qualities are important in the system, what compliance requirements are important for them to be able to adopt it, how can we protect them, essentially. And this is just a matter of injecting priorities as they align to our customers within our own internal security engineering efforts and very transversal, compliance initiatives and so on. And in many ways, what was super interesting about that is already talking to security teams of our customers and, of course, internally. And this was very useful in understanding some of those more fundamental changes that were happening, again, with security teams, getting much closer to developers and operations, some of how their existing tools were failing them in doing that. I mean, if you can't really ask developers and operations to learn a new product, and it's going to take you 6 months to be able to properly use it, right? So in a lot of cases, this was fascinating in the sense that it was the first time a security team was looking at an observability product and having this aha moment of, oh my God, I could totally use this. So it's not just a matter of can developers and operations in my company use it? What would it take? What are some of the questions and requirements for that? But can I also have access, and what can I do with this? And some of the conversations that started from there ultimately turned into some of the features that we have in the product today. So I would say it was a pretty natural evolution in this regard, although maybe unusual, but natural.
Yeah. Yeah, no, and it makes sense. And a lot of it is really just, getting down below the surface level, asking questions, asking a lot of why, kind of getting yourself outside a little bit of a comfort zone, and then just trying to, put yourself in the perspective of somebody else and going, okay, why does that matter to them? Do I need something new? Can I solve it with something existing? I'm always interested to sort of see how people have made transitions. With that, Marc, again, thank you so much for the time today. We always are kind of just looking for, further insight into how do we deal with these systems that are becoming more complicated. They're obviously becoming more important to our businesses. And we appreciate the insight today. Folks, with that, we're going to wrap it up. I want to thank Marc for his time and for Aaron and myself. As always, thanks to all of you for telling a friend, for helping us grow the show. Hopefully you're all staying safe. And with that, we will talk to you next week.
Thank you for listening to The Cloudcast. Please visit thecloudcast.net to find more shows, show notes, videos, and everything social media.